The very cream of Ahmadi Africa. Huh? Alhamdulillah. How are you, Edusi? Fine? You're looking much stronger than before, huh? Alhamdulillah. He's a living miracle, isn't he? Doctors had told him off to to prepare for death within 6 months. How many years have passed since?
The sickness started since 84.
84. And it's 95, closing to its end, huh? MashaAllah. And he was a very frail man at that time as compared to what he is today. Strong, robust, active man in every respect, isn't he? I remember when he first walked into my room, he couldn't stand and put equal pressure on both legs, you know. And he had a crutch or something to walk, slightly crookedly. And the doctor had told him that the bone had been eaten up with cancer and things. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That was osteomyelitis, inflammation of the bone.
Inflammation of the bone, yes. Which was corroding the bone constantly. And also the leg was thinning, wasn't it? Wasting.
They said the whole bone
yes.
was involved in the disease,
yes.
So operation couldn't even help.
See, that's it. So there you are, mashallah.
And now he participates in communal labor in Wakari Amal.
Is that right?
Mashallah.
As Masih has told us a prescription for longevity. He said, use your time for the benefit of mankind and service of God. Then this is the best formula which works for longevity of life. And in his case we have seen it proved true absolutely in every word of it. Huh? So shall we start this question session, please?
Huzur, I have had the privilege of listening to a brief but most impressive and fascinating exposition of the Quranic verse, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. I would like to humbly request Huzur, if it pleases Huzur, to throw some light on that aspect that deals with the great and important role that Africa is destined to play in the affairs of the world in future.
In fact, this verse is very rich and very profound in scientific information as well, and in social education simultaneously, because it can be interpreted differently. Scientifically, it throws light on many possible questions which are still being raised and discussed in the scientist community. Was it at a single moment of creation that man began as a single individual emerging on the horizon and proliferating thereby into many humans as its offsprings? Or was it simultaneous appearance of man through evolution, as they say, at different horizons in different parts of the world, so that we could say that the ancestors were different? Ancestors of Chinese were not the same as the ancestors of Australians, of Americans, and so on and so forth. So this scenario would lead us to that. This scientific discussion has not come to an end as yet. But as far as the evidence uncovered from the fossils of earliest humanoids is concerned, they are tending to believe that this event did not take place simultaneously all over the world, but it must have taken place as a singular event somewhere in some part of the world. So Nafs-e-Wahida is the Quranic statement which supports this view, rather than the view that many humanoids or human beings came into existence or were created by chances here and there, spread all over the world. The Quran says, no, remember that we created you out of a single thing. A nafs is the living thing. So out of a single living thing. But that thing is not called humans. This is the interesting part of that. So it extends back into the origin of life, and it is there we should start our journey. Ya ayyuhan nasu ya'tuqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahidatin. At the beginning, there was just one form of life. There was neither male nor female. But that one single form of life is referred to as a female, not as a male. Despite the fact that the male and female are not yet distinctly divided into two different categories. Why? Because it took care of reproduction itself. The first biotic cells or biounits were sufficiently provided with the mechanism to split into two and thereby continue to live and give offsprings. But there, this methodology was at the expense of the individuality of the person itself. If a single cell is referred to as a person, in that remote past, let's use the terminology person. If that person got divided into two, it would have to sacrifice its individuality anyway. Despite the fact that this thing was not conscious of this. It was governed by laws, and it was not an active participation of this thing for the sake of survival to get divided. But the laws which were created in the beginning moved from unconsciousness to consciousness. So that the very act of proliferation gradually became a source of pleasure. So this division, instead of being a sense of loss for losing one's identity, must have an upper edge of pleasure, so that this form of life continued to split into two and become more and more, and also to become eternal. Because when it was split, two young ones were born out of it. Yet at the same time, the basic inner ego that was being born, which was being created by a God and strengthened further on the journey to evolution, must have unconsciously worked it out. When I say must have unconsciously worked it out, what I mean to say is God worked it out for him, for this thing. Although we may attribute this to that thing, but the Holy Quran repeatedly tells us that was not its own creator, we were the creators. We made the choices, not these things. But this verse refers to all this phenomenon of single birth. So this nafs-e-wahida got split into two. But as I told you, it was an act of pleasure in a sense because it was being eternalized. But at the same time at the cost of its individuality. So if it were a thinking thing, if it could plan for itself, what should be the ideal plan for this thing? To make a shorter portion instead of dividing in the middle, to separate, to cut off a smaller portion, to throw away for independent survival, for it to grow by absorbing food from around and keep its main identity to itself. That should have been the wisest plan. And this exactly is what we find happening in nature. To begin with, the split is in the middle. Then gradually these things begin to give birth to smaller portions. But these smaller portions cannot survive by themselves. They have to be aided. So two participants are needed. One cuts off a small portion and releases it in the surrounding liquid. The other also does the same. And these two join to make one fuller individual. And yet the sex is not born. Then they tend to make these portions smaller and smaller to retain their identity so complete that the loss is minimal. Then what happens is that instead of ejecting these small portions into the open, offering them to grave hazards all around, one of them injected it, a very small portion, into the belly of its companion. And it started being nourished by that companion within its belly. And it was released later on when it was strong enough to face the hazards of life around, hazards to life around. So this was the beginning of making of sexes, the beginning of making of uterus, the beginning of the reproductive forms we observe in all the advanced forms of life, where there are two individuals, male and female. Now this is true of all biotic units, bio-units as they call, where they are zoological or botanical. The vegetative life went through the same processes as the zoological life, animal life we observe. Both got divided into male and female much later after their creation. And in the beginning, they all depended on a single cell proliferation, and because it played the role of a mother, so it was referred to as Ha, Nafsin Wahidatin, as a female. See? So the part which Africa came to play was much later. To be more precise, 1 billion years later or more. But the same verse is sufficient to apply to both these situations and describe them as if it was cut to size, it was made to measure to apply to these situations. In application to the origin of life, as I have demonstrated to you, it's so befitting that you couldn't have described it better than the Quranic verse, that we made you out of a single living thing, which got divided. وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And from that then we made its spouse. The living thing began its solitary journey as an individual, and it didn't need a spouse. But later on, a spouse was created from it itself. خَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And yet human beings are not mentioned at all. No human beings. خَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. Although it was the creation of man which was intended in the first place, right from the beginning it was man who was to be created. Yet, although addresses to man, but the proliferation of man is mentioned at the third stage, not at the previous stage. Ya ayyuhan nasul tuqu rabbakum allazi khalaqakum. O mankind, fear Allah, who has created you out of a single living thing. How did he do it? Then that single living thing gave birth to its own spouse. When they became two partners, then man was created out of life forms which already had two partners. Now you understand? وَخَلَقَ مِنْهُمَا. The first time the reference is to two. خَلَقَ مِنْهُمَا بَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرٌ وَنِسَاءً. Because the parents were two, so the offspring had to be two. Rijalan Manasa. So it runs sense so perfectly and so fluently that right from the beginning of the creation of life on earth to the time when man is ultimately created as its summit, at the summit of evolution. In such a brief expression, everything is described. Unbelievable. Isn't it mind-boggling, how the Holy Quran, that is why the Holy Quran sometimes says, all right, bring one verse like it. Try all your might and wisdom and put your heads together and create a single verse like the verses of the Quran. This is one of those verses which could not have been created. All the mankind and the wise people of the mankind put together. Then it has another social message to be delivered as well. It says, you are black and white and red and yellow and this and that. Where is the pride in that? Remember that we created you from a single soul. So you have the same single parent. Right? And this gives the color or creed or form or geographical place of birth no advantage to any forms of human beings. To create social justice, this verse is sufficient to deliver the message at the time of marriages in particular. And this is where Rasulullah ﷺ selected this verse to be read, the very first verse. Isn't it fascinating for that choice as well? The Holy Quran is a wonder, of course, but so no less is the wonder of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah ﷺ. You see? Perfectly understood the import of these verses and chose them for the right place to be recited, so that many other messages could also be related to the wisdom of this verse. When two different persons are bonded together through nikah to create rijalan kaseeran wa nisa, then the reminder is, remember your small beginning. Anyway, you're so insignificant, you were nothing. And we used to distribute you and proliferate you through a means of single bifurcation. The purpose of sex must not be forgotten. It is not just pleasure. This purpose was served even before sex was created. So the purpose is preservation of species. Don't over much emphasize the pleasure part, and always keep in mind the ultimate purpose of this instrument of sex, which provides you with an additional pleasure, not the main pleasure. The main pleasure lies in the service of the purpose, in the realization of the purpose, which is to say, it should be used for proliferation of the species and preservation of the species. Now, this verse also completely answers the stupid objections and insinuations raised by the homosexuals of the modern time. They even have gone even to the length as to say that sexuality is natural in man, some people are born with these traits, and as such it should not be condemned on the basis of morality. Now this verse reminds us that when there was a single person, there was no sex involved. Then there were two sexes created, they were created for the purpose of heterosexual relationship, not for the purpose of single, single-handed participation in anything. Or let me not say single-handed, of the same sex participation, because it will be non-productive. Either you get bereft of sex altogether and return to your remote past where you could bifurcate yourself. Or the moment you enter the stage of sex, then you must follow the pattern created by Allah and indulge only in heterosexuality, not in homosexuality. Because if you do that, then you defy the plan of nature, and you reject the scheme through which God has made the survival of the species possible and definite. And that is the, bisexual relationship. If you reject it, then you are demanding extinction. Pleasure was an additional factor related to it, so that men would be reminded and women would be reminded that despite the pain they have to go through it, they should still not hesitate to give birth to children. If the pleasure was not, attached to it, perhaps nobody would care, and the man would become extinct anyway, or life would become extinct anyway. So here the second stage begins of the message, that if you reject this plan of thing, then the alternative would only be that you go for the extinction of the species. And now you read the message of AIDS, then you begin to relate it to the same, and you understand why AIDS, particularly to punish the homosexuals. It began with them, it is largely confined to them or to those who indulge in relationship of heterosexual and homosexuality. So the basis is homosexuality. It was given boost by homosexuality. It is particularly hitting at the homosexuals. And the message delivered is, you have rejected the plan of God for the preservation of your species, so you have no right to reproduce. You already abandoned that plan. So get lost, That's the third final message, get lost. And also, the rest of the humanity is punished for this mutual relationship, otherwise they could not have contracted this disease. This is again the message of the same verse, that we have created you with a purpose, with a design, where the two sexes must participate for the preservation of human species, for the reproduction of human species. Otherwise, you will create some disorders. And if you divert your attention to other sources of pleasure dependent on the same act, but other compartments of pleasures where the purpose is not served and only the pleasure is attained, then you will be condemned by God. And man has been condemned already. This invention, who made it? Was it made by Maulvis or the priests? It is God who is still in charge, who is in the driving seat all the time. So he watches mankind behaving in certain ways and devises means to give them strong reminders. And these reminders have been delivered to him for centuries in other sexual related diseases. Gonorrhea, syphilis, erysipelas, and many other similar diseases which are also sex related, and are confined to sex, so that the innocent people do not suffer, It's a strange thing, Unbelievable, this is so precisely made that only those who indulge in excesses, they are punished, not the others. Innocent couple remain free in the same atmosphere where aid is striking at every Tom, Dick and Harry all around them. They're dying in masses, and the innocent couple within them remains absolutely untouched. So the same message, as I told you, is delivered by the same verse. This message also is delivered by the same verse. Another aspect of this verse, which was brought to my attention by Wahab Sahib just now, which I did not answer in the beginning, because that I thought I would come to later. The major important messages inherent in this verse are these which I have just briefly mentioned. There is another thing which has come to our notice, that when the species man was born, humanoids or Homo sapiens, before Homo sapiens, that man was called humanoid, which meant that it had some human characters very prominent in it, but it was not yet fully prepared to be called humans. So it was humanoid. When the humanoid came into being, it also came into being as a single person, which gave birth to humanoids rather than to the previous species it belonged to. And when the humanoids gave birth to humans, they also gave birth to a single distinct species which was fit to be called Homo sapien. The humanoids, in fact, the human-like things, gave birth to Homo erectus first. Homo erectus means a species which can walk straight on its two legs, erect. While all other species, walked face looking downwards onto the earth like animals, other animals. So yet the monkeys also, you think they can walk straight, but not truly. When you see them, going across long journeys, they always, walk on their fours. And they can only straighten up for a while, not permanently or not for long periods, because they were closing upon the creation of man. So when these Homo erectus were born, they were a species which more often walked in its two legs, and adequate changes in the hip bones and the sockets of leg joints were also made before that. It was not that this Homo erectus was created first and then the changes were brought about. There was no surgery carried out anyway. There were internal changes in the recorded messages of genes, which once received a message from Allah, all right, the next time to give offspring, change the design of the hips and the joints and how the bones should fit into each other, so that this species begins to walk straight. It does not have to always bend forward. And suddenly one day it happened, And then you said Homo erectus is born, one who can walk on two legs. And yet it has a smaller skull case. It did not have enough cavity to fill with enough brains to make it so very distinct from the earlier forms of life. So it was Homo erectus but not Homo sapien. Then one day this miracle was created, that a child was born with a bigger skull and with enough space for the brain to fill it, that cavity, larger part of portion of brain. But larger portion of brain is not accidental to the size of the cavity at all. These things have to go together. internal designs are needed to create bigger brain material. At the same time, a bigger cavity is to be created, which are two different phenomena occurring at different cell levels. So some part of genes can take care of larger skulls. Some other parts of the genes can take care of larger production of brain material and their coordination as well. It's a very complicated affair. It's not just the mass of the brain is increased. Now, if it happened haphazardly, separately, then it is far more likely, for instance, for the skulls to become bigger and the brain to remain small, striking against the skull here and there, like an empty box, tin box with very little in it. And that would damage the brain, of course. If, on the contrary, it was the brain which was made bigger suddenly, and the skull remained the same size, all the new members of the new species would become epileptic at birth, of such grave nature that the survival of their chances is practically non-existent. Bigger brain and smaller cell, brain cavity, would make them, less than human beings, less than animals before them. Because first of all, their thinking capacity would be adversely affected. Secondly, they will go constantly into spasms and, sudden outbreaks of epileptic spasms, and they would have no chance of survival at all among themselves. Shadullah Shah Chua, you remember that? Some people are born with smaller skulls. The result is that the brain is squeezed small and it is kept small. So they have very little thinking faculty and constantly suffer from epileptic seizures and other things. So that is what I mean. Nature must have created both together. But what happened was, according to the Quran, it was just one prototype which was first created. And because the reference is to a female, so that prototype has to be referred as female. A female was born of a different species to a female of a previously different species. And then began the journey for the proliferation of mankind on earth. What Wahab Azam Sahib wanted to hear to his utter prayer was that one singular thing which is referred to as a female was born in Africa. That is why he pointed out, come on, please, give an exposition of that verse, which delivers such a wonderful message, music to our souls. That first person was born in Africa, and it was a female. And through that female, somehow God created the man. And that is also the solution to the verse which refers to the birth of Jesus Christ. The real wonder which relates to that verse is that Christians say, how could a female give birth to a child by herself? And if a female gives birth to a child by herself, it has to be the child of God. God has to be the other participant. So the Holy Quran raises the question of the birth of Adam. People misconstrue that verse and understand the reference to mean that we created man out of dust like this. It is not at all that. The message is, go and study the history of evolution, how the beginning of man began, out of dust. But it went through various stages where at every important and crucial stage, it was the mother which gave birth, a single mother. which gave birth to the other offsprings, until even at the stage of man. The first specimen of human being was created in the form of a single mother. And somehow God saw to it that that mother either gives birth to, is coming into relation with the previous males, or by some internal phenomenon which might have been provided by God to it. It might have been hermaphrodite. So these issues are yet to be resolved by scientists as to what happened and how it happened. But they are coming closer to accepting the view that the first female, that is human, Homo sapien, human female, was born in Africa. And from that, the human generation began to spread, first in the same continent and then to the other continents. And this happened around 200-some thousand years ago. Right? You see, for the sake of this last bit of explanation, I had to speak on all the previous stages of which ultimately led us to the last conclusion, that man was born in Africa. Okay?
I had also wanted to know the role that Africa is destined to play
Oh yes, I
in the
know.
affairs of the world.
From that once I inferred, and I think that is what was music to his soul. I inferred in a very strange way that as Khana Kaaba was the beginning of civilization on earth, where God taught man to live in homes, houses built of stone and things. Previously, no man had ever built a house for himself. Awwala Baitin is the mention. Not in Awwala Baitin. Wudhiya Linnase. It's not the worship which is mentioned at all. The very first house which was created for the benefit of mankind was this house of God. So the civilization began with this house, and it culminated on this house again, because around this house was given birth, was Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam given birth. Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was born around this house, and the culmination of the purpose of this house was related to the advent of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. As for the first time, this house was built for the benefit of the entire mankind, because at that time there were no divisions. Nafs-e-wahida concept is reborn here. So at the end, for the mankind to be brought together under one banner in an indivisible entity of human beings as such, was to be done through the advent of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And again in relation to the same house, where mankind was to be trained to come from all over the world and do pilgrimage to this house of God. So the exercise has long been begun, has long started, but it is yet to culminate, and we may see, inshallah, as Ahmadis, the ultimate culmination of this exercise for this house to play a pivotal role in bringing all mankind together. Already it attracts mankind from all the continents, all the major countries of the world, getting together every year around this house and demonstrating the importance of the unity of mankind as well as the unity of God. Not as two separate entities, but as things united. If there is one God, there has to be one mankind, without any stupid prejudices of race, color, and creeds, etc., etc. Now this put me on the train of thought, in relation to the first man being born in Africa. I say, if this is what the Inna Lillahi Ilahi Raji'un means, that the whole circle gets back to the point of its origin, is completed by returning to its origin. So maybe Africa plays the most important role in the ultimate culmination of man's purpose, because man began from Africa, so it should end up like Khana Kaaba, in playing that role by fulfilling it to its culmination. And the last phase on earth which the world would see would be the domination of Africans all over the world in some form. Now, this seems to be a compliment to your egos, but in my opinion it's a warning. It's a warning of a grave nature, because those people who would be predominant on earth at the time of doomsday are described as a Sharrun Nas. The ones who have gone so far astray in the end that they have been decided by God to be wiped out from earth. So there are compliments and there are also warnings attached in these things. The only thing I would like you to do is to satisfy your ego through your relationship to Islam rather than to your relationship to the country or continent. So there you will not go beyond the time when Islam emerges as victorious with African participation, let's say. The moment man moves farther away from the boundaries of Islam into the wilderness of a hellish life of freedom from the yoke of Islam, then stop short. Don't call yourself Africans anymore. You see? So take pride in Islam. As long as you serve Islam, well and good. But after that, whatever is left is meaningless, isn't it? Okay. Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
What's that? You are from Uganda?
I'm from Tanzania.
Tanzania, that's
My name
right.
is Said Muhammad Manoro.
You see, Tanzanians and Ugandans speak with similar accents. The English is very telltale. The Ugandans' English is more pronounced as far as the ends of the sentences are concerned. They cannot make a silent end, They make it a ta, 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 ta all the time, The Kenyans do it with a little more softness, but the general style of the accent is the same, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Right, come on, let's hear you.
Yes, my question is, why there are Ahmadis who willingly participate in financial sacrifices, there are others who do not, despite the fact that Allah has, through His grace, very richly endowed them with wealth. What steps should be taken to such brethren along the blessed path of financial sacrifices?
Would you repeat this question, please? I was, all the time watching for those signs which are minimal in your accent. I have made you conscious of because of your educational background and service, long service
Yeah.
as a civil servant.
Yes, yes.
Your accent was far more polished than ordinary.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, that's it. Yes. Come on, repeat the question.
I mean, why there are Ahmadis
Yes,
who willingly participate in financial sacrifices.
correct.
There are others who do not,
Right.
despite the fact that Allah has, through His grace, very richly endowed them with wealth. What steps should be taken to take such brethren along the blessed path of financial sacrifices?
You recite to them the verses of the Holy Quran and tell them the meaning, and also make them listen to my sermons on this issue, which with the grace of Allah have produced some very welcome effect on such people. In some areas, I shouldn't name them now, but I have a definite province in India in mind in particular. It was reported that the people are very good Ahmadis, very strong, but financially they are the worst. Worst in the sense of sacrifices. Otherwise God has endowed them with all the wealth. There are very rich people among them, but financially they just don't respond to the appeals. So I inquired from the then Nazir Baitul Mal, what measures had you taken? He said, I have also gone there myself, I have sent inspectors and this and that. But unfortunately no improvement, it's a different type of people. I said, have you ever tried my sermon which I delivered in Spain on the subject of financial sacrifices? He said, no. I said, do it this time. You see, first of all, God has appointed me to this place and He teaches me how best to appeal to people. So if you don't benefit from that, by that much you are the losers. So instead of writing your own essays on this, when God has already provided you this, why don't you utilize this? So send somebody or a few inspectors loaded with these videos or cassettes and let them be played everywhere they go instead of giving a sermon on their own. And the result was amazing. The transformation was almost, revolutionary. But as yet it is not complete. I know a large number are still left out of that influence, but it is not the same sermon always. I have delivered other sermons on this issue in relation to the Quranic teachings and in relation to the conduct of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and those who are with him. So you utilize the services of these small things and they would produce big effect, inshallah. Right?
Yes, thank you.
Please. Lucy didn't need such a thing at all. He was born with this. MashaAllah. Hadi.
Yes, Joseph. Abdurrahman is my name, from Ghana.
Yes?
The question of spiritual...
I must say Ghanaians are excellent in financial sacrifices. Really. I'm impressed by the Ghanaian character in that. Only previously they were haphazardly used. Most of the time Amir Sahib, made his own appeals and never pressed them to a regular system of contributions. So this was my first disagreement with him when I visited Ghana. He continued to cheat for a while, but then I pressed my foot down. I said, no more Amir Sahib. Either you remain an Amir or no Amir, but no cheating on this. Have this system implemented. So he did. With the grace of Allah, as I proved to him later through facts, the financial sacrifice has risen many, many times more. Plus the additional appeals have also become more productive than before. See? Ghanaians have this character of being generous. Generally. I found Ghanaians to be really very generous people, even in poverty. So they have to be more generous in relation to the services to Islam, and they are with the grace of Allah. And that also should be brought to the notice of the Tanzanian to create a sense of jealousy, rightful jealousy. Tell them, what are you doing? You are being stingy. And for your own loss, for the ultimate loss of yourself. Do it like the Ghanaian brothers do, and you see, inshallah, Allah will take care of your requirements and needs and make you, wealthier and healthier than before, right? Please.
The question of spiritual churches springing up in Ghana has attracted so
Christian
many...
churches.
Spiritual churches.
Spiritual churches.
Pentecostals.
Right.
Attracted so many Ghanaians to their fold. Now it's becoming a menace, and at a stage the government asked that churches should register, and 2,000 of them registered, more than 2,000.
Really?
So you could see the number of people that have sprung into these churches. Now all based on this superstition and witchcraft.
Right.
I would like to know whether is there any reality in witchcraft, Huzur?
None. Thank you. None in the witchcraft practice in Africa today. I have noticed it, I have studied it, nothing whatsoever. Only superstition and mischievous conduct on the part of those who use poisons, herbs, and other clever devices to injure others and to to terrorize others through these means. There's the only substance in that witchcraft, nothing else. And fraud is on the rampant, Sorry, once I think it was from Ghana, perhaps it was reported to me that these spiritualists are trying to win converts to them by playing frauds on the people by saying that, all right, whoever among you is completely incapable of taking a single step forward, he's debilitated or he's crooked in legs or born with some congenital defect, etc., etc. So all such disabled people of the most advanced cases should raise their hands. And many did. And they say, in the name of Christ, I tell you to become whole. Stand up. And lo, they all stood up. And they threw their crutches away. Now, this created such a dramatic effect on the people that it was told that they began to incline towards Christianity. I said, it's no problem. You also go and participate there and take your genuine Ahmadis born with congenital defects. Or if not Ahmadis, we don't want to embarrass Ahmadis, borrow some non-Ahmadis from around you and take them along. And the moment he invites, make them stand up and say, please do it to us. And there you will see the utter failure in doing anything. That's one way of exposing their fraud. The second is just a simple, gentle question addressed to them, that, sir, if you are equipped with God with such fantastic potential to care, then why do the Christians run such big, expensive hospitals all over the continent? All the doctors, all the specialists should be discharged and sacked from service forthwith. Instead, you should be employed. In all the Christian hospitals, the spiritualists should take over. And then we'll get converted to Christianity there in your hospitals, not elsewhere. See, it's all fraud. So also is that witchcraft a fraud. You have to combat it with wisdom and with the enlightenment of an Ahmadi. There's no problem to defeat these people. Right?
On the same again. We believe in that. We try to convince them, like you say. We try to explain to them. But most often than not, they ask the question, why is it that these things have names? In every country, like in Ghana,
yeah,
we call it Baifo, in Ashanti. Hausas will call it Mai. And all that, they have names.
That's right.
So why do the names exist? Is it that they are not effective, or that they are...
Are there any nameless evils in the world? Every evil has a name. That's no answer at all. Superstition is a universal trend of man, which is born out of split of unity of God. When the concept of unity of God is split, then idolatry begins. Then superstitions are a natural child of such idolatrous practices. So if you trace the journey of all religions from their source to the present time, you'll see the same history being unrolled. Noah began with unity of God. By the time of Abraham, the entire people of Noah had become idolatrous. Abraham began with the unity of God. Before the time of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, all the people of Arabia, the children of Ismail, had become idolatrous. Moses began with unity, and very soon we observe as it is recorded in the Old Testament and also in the Quran, that they all become idolatrous and also superstitious. So superstition is the byproduct of the spirit of unity. When you shatter a plate, it becomes small splinters and pieces here and there. So that is what superstition is. And if you name those splinters, it doesn't mean that they are genuine and they should be there. They remain splinters. They can't become plates anyway. Okay? Please.
We experimented, as you
Please. You did?
pointed out. One evangelist had come from Germany.
Acha.
So we went to the school of the blind
Mm-hmm.
and brought blind people from there. We couldn't raise any.
It was Ghana, who posed this problem, and I suggested to them this, and they did it cleverly.
Yes, he was called Bonke, Reverend from Germany.
And again, once I asked some of these, you sometimes come to me directly and ask these questions. I said, look here, why is it that Europe particularly is without these spiritual schools? Why do you have such expensive system of healthcare in Europe and in America and Canada, while you could do away with these with the help of Christianity so easily? Okay, they tell me that the time is over, but it was a pleasure sitting with you and exchanging the views. If by the next meeting they are still here, we could meet again. But I won't be here on Sunday next. Okay? The Sunday after.
Yes.
Wahab Sahib, did you participate in these Khaja Club meetings? No?
Not this year, Huzur.
No, this is not fair.
I didn't get to know about it, Huzur.
No, they wanted to invite you, but you were not there you were not available at that
They said
time.
they are repeating it on Wednesday, inshallah.
They are not repeating, I have forced them to repeat it. They tried, every excuse to get wriggle out of this. I said no. Anas has to be invited and regularly voted a member into the Khaja Club. And without inviting Amir Sahib Ghana, Khaja Club annual dinner is meaningless. If you like to invite some others, you may suggest it to them, right? To keep you company. Assalamu alaikum.